The iron shackles bit into his wrists as they dragged him before the women, and the chief's voice cut through the desert wind like a blade. "Choose when to live, rancher, or they all burn come morning." Thomas Bellamy looked at the four faces staring back at him, women who'd trusted him, followed him, believed his promises, and understood that mercy and murder had become the same thing. If you enjoy powerful Western stories like this, subscribe for more. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The sun had been a copper coin on the horizon when they'd taken him. Thomas Bellamy had been riding the fence line on the eastern border of his property, checking posts that winter had warped and loosened. When the arrow struck the dirt 3 feet ahead of his mare's hooves, the animal reared. Thomas held his seat but didn't reach for his rifle. A man didn't live 47 years in disputed territory without learning when to reach and when to wait. They emerged from the cottonwoods like shadows gaining substance. 12 men, maybe 15. Chiricahua, he thought, though he'd never been certain of such things the way other white men pretended to be. They wore a mixture of traditional dress and stolen cavalry boots, their faces painted for something Thomas couldn't read. War or ritual or justice, perhaps all three. The leader was younger than Thomas expected, 30 at most. His eyes held the kind of certainty that came from seeing too much death too early. "Thomas Bellamy," the leader said in English that carried only the faintest accent. "You will come. I've broken no treaty. We are not here about treaties." They bound his hands in front of him with rawhide cord, tight enough to hold, but not cruel. That worried him more than if they'd been rough. Cruelty was simple. This care suggested intention. They rode northwest for 3 days. Thomas kept track of landmarks when he could. The split rock that looked like a preacher's hat. The dry wash where he'd once found a dead prospector's mule. But by the second day they'd moved into country he didn't know. Red stone formations rose like ancient cathedrals. The land was older here. It remembered things. They gave him water at dawn and dusk, fed him sparingly dried meat and cornmeal mixed with ash. His captors spoke little, and never in English when they thought he might be listening. At night they didn't hobble him beyond the wrist bindings. They didn't need to. A man alone in this country wouldn't last 2 days on foot. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they came to the village. It was larger than Thomas expected. Not the temporary camps he'd seen from a distance over the years, but something more permanent. Wickiups formed in neat rows. He could smell bread baking. Somewhere a child laughed, and the sound made his chest tighten with a homesickness he didn't understand. He'd never had children. His wife Mary had died of fever 7 years back, childless and disappointed. They took him to a wickiup at the village's edge and made him sit. The young leader entered behind him and crouched in the traditional way, weight on his heels, back straight. "My name is Dakia," he said. "You know this word?" "I don't. It means he talks. My mother believed I would be wise." "A keeper of stories." Dakia's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. She was wrong about the wisdom. Thomas said nothing. "Do you know why you are here, Thomas Bellamy?" "I expect you'll tell me. 3 summers ago, your ranch hands took water from the spring at White Rock Canyon. You knew this spring was not yours to use. We were driving cattle north. My men needed water. It was not yours," Dakia repeated. The words carried no heat. They were simply facts being set in place like stones. 2 of my people were there, an elder and his grandson. Your men killed them both. Thomas felt something cold slide down his spine. "I heard about that. I didn't send those men. They were supposed to stay on my land. When I learned what they'd done, you fired them. Yes, you did not bring them to justice. You did not pay blood price to the families. You sent them away with wages and horses." Thomas had no answer that would matter. The old man had explained it to him once. Blood demands blood or payment or sacrifice. Firing 2 men was less than nothing. It was insult added to death. "One of those men," Dakia said, "was my uncle. The boy was 9 winters old." The silence stretched. Outside, The village moved through its evening rhythms. Women called to children. Somewhere meat was roasting. "I will die then," Thomas said. "No," Dakia stood. "You will choose." They brought the women at sunset. Thomas was taken from the wickiup and made to stand in the village center. Fires had been lit in a wide circle. The entire community had gathered, men, women, children, elders. Their faces showed no emotion he could name. They'd come to witness something. Law being satisfied or broken. Thomas couldn't tell which. The women were led forward in a line, 4 of them. Thomas's legs nearly gave out. He knew them all. Sarah Greenwood came first. She was perhaps 35, lean and sun-weathered. With blonde hair she kept tied back severe. She'd worked as a seamstress in Broken Creek before Thomas hired her on as camp cook for his seasonal cruise. She was a widow. Her husband had died of snakebite their 2nd year in the territory. She had steady hands and didn't waste words. When she saw Thomas, her expression didn't change, but her shoulders straightened slightly. Behind her came Emma Reardon. Red-haired and younger, maybe 22. Irish by way of Boston. She'd come west with her father, a surveyor, and stayed after he died of pneumonia. Thomas had hired her to keep his books and handle correspondence. She could read and write better than most men and did figures in her head like magic. Her green eyes went wide when she saw him, and her hands, also bound, began to shake. Third was Rosa Delgado. Mexican, though she'd been born in Texas before the borders changed. She was the oldest of the 4, perhaps 50, with silver threading her black hair. She'd managed the boarding house in Broken Creek until a fire took it. Thomas had given her work managing his household after Mary died. She kept his ranch house from falling into bachelor squalor. When she saw him, she closed her eyes briefly, and her lips moved in what might have been prayer. The last was Margaret Chun. That's what she called herself now, though Thomas knew it wasn't the name she'd been born with. She was Chinese in her late 20s, and she'd come to the territory by a route she'd never explained. She spoke 4 languages, including passable Spanish and Apache. Thomas had hired her as a translator for his dealings with Mexican suppliers and the occasional peaceful contacts with the tribes. She was the only one of the 4 who didn't look at him. Her eyes fixed on the middle distance, and her face had gone very still. "These women," Dakia said, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear, "came from your ranch. We took them 2 days ago from the town. They work for you. They live on your land or by your money." Thomas's throat had gone dry. "They've done nothing wrong." "No," Dakia agreed. "They have not. Their blood is not the debt. But you are a man who builds. You gather people. You make a household where there should be only land and wind. This is your way of power." Thomas understood then. They weren't going to kill him. That would be too simple. Too clean. "By morning," Dakia said, "you will choose 1 woman to live. The other 3 will burn." The words dropped into the gathered silence like stones into a still pond. Thomas heard someone gasp. He thought it might have been Emma. "Choose one," Dakia continued, "and show us what a white man values. Show us how your people make such decisions. We will learn from this." "I won't." Thomas's voice came out hoarse. "I won't choose. Then all 4 die." Sarah Greenwood made a sound in her throat. Not quite a cry. Thomas forced himself to look at each woman in turn. Sarah's jaw had set hard. Emma was crying silently, tears cutting tracks through the trail dust on her face. Rosa's lips still moved in prayer. Margaret's eyes had closed. "You have until the sun touches the eastern rocks," Dakia said. "We will bring you food and water. You may speak with the women if you wish. When the time comes, you will point. That is all. You will point, and the woman will be freed. The others will be taken to the desert and burned alive." "This isn't justice," Thomas said. "This is cruelty." "Yes," Dakia said. His voice hadn't changed. It still held that terrible neutrality. "But you know of cruelty. Your men knew of it when they killed an old man teaching his grandson to find water in dry places. You knew of it when you sent those men away with money instead of rope. This cruelty is just one more learning. We learn from you. Now you learn from us." They gave him a wickiup apart from the women, but not so far he couldn't hear Emma's continued weeping. The sound carved into him. Guards stood at his entrance and theirs. He was given water and corn cakes he couldn't eat. The night pressed down like a weight. Thomas Bellamy had killed 3 men in his life. The first was during the war, and he still didn't know the man's name or even which army he'd fought for in that confused skirmish in the Missouri woodlands. The second had been a cattle thief he'd shot in the back as the man fled. That one still visited his dreams. The third was self-defense, clear and witnessed, a drunk who'd pulled a knife in a Tucson saloon. He'd made peace with that one, but he'd never chosen who would die. His men at White Rock, he hadn't sent them to kill. He'd sent them to drive cattle, and they'd exceeded their authority in the worst way possible. When he'd learned of it, he'd felt sick for a week. But he'd also known that turning them over to tribal justice would mean torture and death, and he couldn't do it. He'd told himself it was because he couldn't be certain what had happened. The men said the old Apache had drawn a weapon first. Maybe that was true. Probably it wasn't. Thomas had taken the coward's path. He'd let them go. Now 4 women would pay for his cowardice. Unless he chose. The thought of choosing made something twist in his gut. Sarah, who'd never once complained about cooking for 20 men in high summer heat. Emma, who'd laughed at his terrible handwriting and taught him to form his letters better, so his business correspondence wouldn't embarrass him. Rosa, who'd kept his house as carefully as if it were her own, who'd left flowers on Mary's grave every Sunday. Margaret, who'd once told him she'd never expected to find honest work in the territory, and had looked close to tears when he'd offered her wages she could live on. How did a man choose between such lives? He couldn't. He wouldn't. But if he didn't choose, they'd all die. The logic was elegant in its cruelty. Dakia had set a trap that closed no matter which way Thomas moved. Sometime near midnight, he heard footsteps. Margaret Chun ducked into his wickiup. No guards followed. She settled on her heels in the manner of the people, graceful despite her bound hands. "They let you come," Thomas said. "I asked to speak with you. They said yes. I think," she paused, considering, "I think they want to see what we will say to each other." "Margaret, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." "For what?" "You didn't take us. You weren't at White Rock. My men were your men, yes, but not your hands." She looked at him steadily. "I came to tell you something. I've been listening. I understand some of their words. This is not just about revenge." Thomas leaned forward. "What is it then?" "Teaching, showing. They've been arguing about the white man's law, how it works, whether it can coexist with their law. Some of the young men want war. They say whites cannot learn honor. Dakia is trying to prove them wrong. Or," she frowned, "trying to prove them right, so the elders will see it clearly, by making me choose who dies, by seeing if you will choose at all, if you will try to think like them. Make the hard choice their way." Margaret's voice dropped lower. "In their law, the debt was paid when your men died or when you paid blood price. You did neither. You tried to make the debt disappear by sending the men away. As if death can be made to mean nothing with distance." Thomas felt something click in his mind. "This isn't about punishment. No, it's about education, yours and theirs. They watch to see what you are made of." She shifted her weight. Her bound hands rested in her lap. "Thomas, I know what you're thinking. Don't what? Don't refuse. Don't try to die for us all. That's the white man's story. The noble sacrifice." She shook her head. "That's not what this is. If you refuse, you're just proving you can't learn, that your mercy is ignorance. They'll burn us all, and they'll know that whites are not people who can understand hard law. I can't choose between you. Then don't choose between us. Choose for us." Margaret met his eyes. What would an Apache chief do? If he had 4 people and could save only one, what would his choice mean? Thomas had no answer. Margaret rose. "I will tell you something true. Emma is youngest. She could have children. Rosa is eldest. She has lived her years. Sarah is needed by no one. She told me once she had no family left. She paused. I have people in Sacramento who don't know I'm alive. Maybe that's better. You're telling me to choose you, Thomas said quietly. I'm telling you there are reasons that make sense in this world, not your world. This world. She moved toward the entrance. They're watching to see if you understand there are other ways of wisdom. Whether you can learn. After she left, Thomas sat in the darkness. Dawn came slowly, the sky shifting from black to gray to pale amber. Thomas hadn't slept. His mind had walked the same circles all night, finding no path that didn't lead to death. They came for him when the sun touched the rocks to the east, just as Dakia had said. The 4 women were already in the village center. They'd been cleaned and given fresh clothing. Thomas realized with a sick feeling that this was ritual preparation. They were being made ready for death as if for ceremony. The villagers gathered again, more this time. Word must have spread to neighboring camps. Thomas saw faces he recognized from trading encounters over the years. None showed anger, none showed satisfaction. They watched with the stillness of people witnessing something important. Dakia stood beside the women. Thomas Bellamy, have you chosen? Thomas looked at the 4 faces. Sarah's expression was closed, controlled. She'd decided something, but he couldn't read what. Emma had cried herself empty and now just looked exhausted. Rosa's lips moved in continuous prayer. Margaret watched him with eyes that held knowledge and resignation in equal measure. I have thought, Thomas said carefully, about what choice means in your law. Dakia's eyes sharpened slightly. Several of the watching men leaned forward. Your law says blood must be answered. Death must be paid. When my men killed at White Rock, I sent them away. I tried to erase the debt with distance. I understand now that this was worse than doing nothing. I tried to make your dead mean less than life by pretending the debt didn't exist. Yes, Dakia said softly. This is true. If I choose one woman, I say that 3 lives are worth less than 1. I make the same mistake. I try to count death as numbers instead of meaning. Then you choose none? No. Thomas took a breath. His heart hammered. I will choose, but not by making 3 die. By making all 4 live. Confusion rippled through the watching crowd. Dacia's expression didn't change. That is not the choice given to you. Then I offer new terms. Thomas's voice steadied as the idea crystallized. Blood demands payment. My men killed your uncle and his grandson. I sent them away. The debt was never paid. It still exists. 2 lives were taken. 2 lives should be the price. You offer yourself, Dakia said. 1 life for 2. This is still not balance. No, I offer myself and one of the women. The woman who chooses to die with me. That is 2 for 2. Blood answered with blood. But the choice of who dies isn't mine to make alone. Let the women choose which of them will stand with me. The silence that fell was absolute. Thomas saw calculation move behind Dakia's eyes. He was running the new offer against the framework of his law, testing whether it fit, whether it held. Why should they choose? Someone called from the crowd. An older warrior, his face deeply lined. The debt is yours. Because they're here because of me, Thomas said, turning to face the crowd. Because I hired them. Because I gave them wages from land that's disputed. Because they lived on my ranch and in my town and under my protection. They're part of the debt whether they knew it or not. In your law, the family pays. The bloodline pays. I have no bloodline. These women are the closest I have to family. So let them choose which of them stands for kin. It was a gamble built on half-understood concepts and desperation, but Thomas saw several heads nod. The old ideas of family responsibility, of collective debt, these were things they understood. Dakia turned to the 4 women. Do you accept this choice? No one spoke at first. Then Sarah Greenwood stepped forward. I'll stand with him. No, Emma said quickly. Sarah, you can't. I'm the right choice and you know it. Sarah's voice was calm, matter of fact. I've got no children, no husband. My folks are dead. You've got your whole life ahead of you, Emma. Rosa's got grandchildren in El Paso. Margaret's got her reasons to live. I've just got days. I'll stand with Thomas. Sarah, Thomas started. Don't, she said sharply. Don't make this harder. This is sense, and you know it. She looked at Dakia. 2 for 2, I choose myself. We pay the debt together, but Margaret stepped forward as well. No, I should stand. I have no children either. And she paused. I was there, in a way. I helped Thomas hire men for the cattle drive that year. I knew the territory. I should have warned him better about the water rights. The debt is partly mine. Margaret, that's not, Thomas began. It is true enough, Margaret said. In this law, guilt spreads. You said it yourself. We're all part of the debt. Then I should stand too, Rosa said quietly. I kept his house. I took his money. I prayed for him when his wife died. If this is about family, I've been more family to Thomas than anyone. Emma made a choking sound. So have I. He taught me accounts. He trusted me with his business. I can't let you all. Enough. Dakia's single word cut through the rising chaos. He studied the 5 of them, Thomas and the 4 women, with an expression Thomas couldn't read. This is not what we expected, Dakia said finally. An elder spoke from the crowd in rapid Apache. Dakia answered. Others joined in. The discussion grew heated. Thomas caught fragments through Margaret's earlier lessons. Balance, debt, law, teaching. Words that mattered but didn't translate cleanly. Finally, Dakia raised his hand for silence. Thomas Bellamy, you have done something I did not anticipate. You offered death, but more, you created family where there was none. These women, they don't share your blood, but they claim the debt is shared. This is, he searched for words. This is not white man's thinking. This is closer to our way. The people share responsibility. The family answers for the family. So? Thomas asked. So we have learned something. Dakia looked at the women. And so have you, all of you. You learned that you are family without knowing you were. This is the first thing. The second thing is this. The debt must still be paid. But the payment can take different forms. He walked slowly around the circle, looking at each face in turn. Your men took life without thought, without seeing the humanity of who they killed. You sent them away without payment, because you saw them as separate from you. But these women, they step forward because they see themselves as connected. They chose to share your fate. This is sacrifice that means something. Dakia stopped in front of Thomas. I will make you an offer. You may refuse it. If you refuse, the original choice stands point to one woman who lives, or all 4 die. Thomas waited. The offer is this. You and one woman will come with us. Not to die, to live among us for 1 year. You will learn our language, our ways, our law. You will work as we work. Hunt as we hunt. You will become part of the people for that time. At the end of the year, you will both be free to return to your ranch. But you will return changed. You will understand the law you broke. You will understand why the debt mattered. And you will teach other whites what you learned. That's not death, someone protested from the crowd. No, Dakia agreed, but it is sacrifice. A year of life is not small. And there are ways to die without leaving the body. He looked at the women again. So now there are 3 choices. Thomas points and 1 woman goes free while 3 die. Or all 4 die together. Or Thomas and 1 woman come with us for a year and the other 3 go free. The choice is still Thomas's, but now you see what choice can mean. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Not relief, the trap was still there, the cruelty still present, but it had changed shape, become something else. Why? He asked. Why offer this? Because you surprised me, Dakia said simply. I thought you would choose by white man's logic. Youngest or oldest, usefulness. some measure that makes a person a thing to be counted. Instead, you tried to think like us. You failed, you're white, you'll always fail to truly understand. But you tried. And your women, they showed you that family is real even when blood is not. This is worth teaching. Both to you and to my own people. He gestured to the watching crowd. Many here want war. They say whites will never learn honor, never understand that land and people in debt are connected. They say we should drive you all out or die trying. But if you can learn even a little, then maybe war is not the only path. Maybe there is a way to live in the same world. And if I refuse your offer? Thomas asked. Then you prove them right. Then you show that whites only understand death and possession. Then the women die and you live with the choosing. And then, Dakaya's voice went flat. Then I will have to agree with those who want war. Because I will have no argument left. Thomas looked at the four women. Sarah met his eyes steadily. Emma was crying again, but silently now. Rosa's hands had stilled their prayer. Margaret gave him the smallest nod. Who comes with me? Thomas asked. The women decide, Dakia said, as before. They choose who sacrifices a year of life. Thomas expected an argument. Expected them to defer to each other, to hesitate. Instead, Margaret spoke immediately. I will go. Margaret, Emma began, I speak languages. I know some of your customs already. I can learn faster than the others, and, she paused. I have the least to lose if I disappear for a year. Sarah has her work. Emma has her future. Rosa has her grandchildren to visit. I have ghosts and memories. Let me turn them into something useful. There was truth in her words, but Thomas heard something else underneath. Margaret was choosing this because she believed it would work. Because she thought she could help him learn what he needed to learn. You're sure? Thomas asked her. Yes, he turned to Dakia. We accept 1 year. We learn your ways, your language, your law. Then we go back and teach others. You will not be prisoners, Dakia said. But you will not be free. You will be students. And students who fail to learn. He left the threat unfinished. We'll learn. Dakia nodded slowly. Then it is decided. He raised his voice to the crowd. The debt is being paid. Thomas Bellamy and Margaret Chun will live as the people for 1 year. The other 3 women go free. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some nodded approval. Others looked unsatisfied. The old warrior who'd spoken before shook his head and walked away. But the general sense was of tension releasing. The ritual was complete, even if not in the expected way. Sarah, Emma, and Rosa were unbound. Emma rushed forward and grabbed Margaret's hands. Are you sure? Are you really sure? I'm sure. I'll keep your book safe, Emma said, voice breaking. I'll make sure everything's waiting when you come back. Don't wait, Margaret said gently. Live your life. If I come back, good. If not, she shrugged. Rosa touched Margaret's face. I will pray for you every day. Both of you. I will light candles. I will ask the saints to keep you safe. Thank you, Rosa. Sarah just gripped Thomas's shoulder. Learn good, she said quietly. Come back different. Come back better. Then make it mean something. I will, and keep Margaret safe. She's worth 10 of any of us, I know. The 3 women were given horses and supplies. A small party of warriors would escort them to the edge of Apache territory and see them safely toward Broken Creek. It was full daylight now, the sun climbing toward its zenith. Thomas watched them ride away. Emma looked back 3 times. Rosa made the sign of the cross. Sarah just rode straight and didn't turn. Then they were gone. Margaret stood beside Thomas. They were still bound, but loosely now. Guards stood nearby, but not close. It was different. They were different. Not prisoners exactly, not guests. Something new. You took a terrible risk, Margaret said quietly. I know. It might not have worked. They might have killed us all anyway. Yes. Why did you do it? Why not just choose me from the start? I told you there were reasons. You could have pointed and been done. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Because that would have been me making the choice alone. Making it mean what I wanted it to mean. I needed them to see that we're not all. That white folks can learn to think different. And I needed you all to see that you mattered. That you weren't just wages and work. That you're family, Margaret finished. Yes, she nodded slowly. I think we have a hard year ahead of us. I think you're right. Dakia approached them. Come, we have much to do. Your education begins now. First thing you learn, in our tongue the word for choose and the word for sacrifice are almost the same. Only a small difference in sound. A breath. This is not accident. Every choice is sacrifice. Every sacrifice is choice. Remember this. He gestured toward the village. Now come. There is food to prepare, skills to learn, words to speak. You want to understand why your debt mattered. You will learn by living it. You will learn by being part of what you almost destroyed. Thomas and Margaret followed him into the village. Behind them, the sun climbed higher. The desert stretched vast and empty, and full of things Thomas didn't yet understand. Ahead, wiki-ups arranged in patterns that meant something he couldn't read. Women working leather. Men repairing weapons. Children playing a game with stones and string. A world that had always been here, that he'd lived beside for years without seeing. Now he would have to learn to see it. The first weeks were harder than Thomas had imagined. They were given a wiki-up at the village's edge, near enough for supervision, but far enough for privacy. Each morning began before dawn. The women of the village woke them with cold water and corn mush and set them to work immediately. Thomas was sent with the men. He learned to track game he'd never noticed. Learned to read sign in dust and bent grass. Learned that silence was a skill as much as shooting or writing. The men didn't mock him, but they didn't soften the lessons either. When he failed, and he failed often, they simply made him try again. His hands, tough from ranch work, developed new calluses. His legs, strong from riding, learned to cover distance on foot without faltering. His eyes, keen for cattle and fence lines, began to see the smaller details, where water collected, which plants could be eaten, how the land spoke if you knew the language. Margaret was kept with the women. She learned to build wiki-ups, to prepare food in the traditional way, to work leather until it was soft enough for clothing. She learned songs and stories. She learned which plants healed and which poisoned. The women treated her coolly at first. She was an outsider, a payment for debt, but gradually warmed as she proved willing to work without complaint. In the evenings, Dakia came to teach them language. Apache was nothing like Spanish or English, or even the Chinese Margaret had grown up speaking. The sounds came from different places in the mouth and throat. The grammar moved in directions that felt backwards. Thomas struggled. Margaret learned faster, but even she found it difficult. The word for I, Dakia explained one night, changes depending on whether you're speaking of an action you chose or an action that happened to you. The word for we changes depending on whether you include the listener or not. Language shapes thought. Thought shapes choice. Everything comes back to choice with you, Thomas said. Yes, because nothing is without choice. Even when you think you have no choice, you're choosing which limitations to accept, which laws to honor. Your men at White Rock they chose to kill. You chose to send them away. These were choices. They shaped what came after. As autumn moved toward winter, Thomas began to understand things he'd never articulated before. The Apache didn't own land the way whites did. But that didn't mean they had no relationship with it. Every spring, every canyon, every stand of trees existed in a web of stories and laws and responsibilities. The spring at White Rock was sacred not because anyone owned it, but because it had been there since the beginning times. Because the people had used it for generations. Because ancestors had prayed there and taught there and found visions there. When Thomas's men had killed the old man and his grandson at that spring, they'd done more than murder. They'd violated the teaching place. They'd brought death to a space meant for life and learning. The old man had been teaching the boy the old ways, how to survive, how to be a good person, how to understand the sacred. Killing him there was like... Thomas struggled for the comparison. Like shooting a preacher in his own church during a baptism. Not just murder, but a violation of the whole concept of what that place meant. Now you begin to see, Dakia said when Thomas tried to explain this understanding. You begin to see why your sending those men away with wages was worse than if you'd done nothing. You tried to make the violation disappear with distance and money, but sacred violation cannot be erased with distance. The spring still remembers, the land still remembers, the family still remembers. What should I have done? Thomas asked. Brought them back, let them face the family. Let them be judged by our law or by shared law. Let there be payment that meant something. Or, Dakia paused. Or come yourself immediately. Offer yourself for judgment. Offer payment. Offer to learn why what they did mattered. Instead you hid. You sent the problem away. This is white man's law. If you don't see the problem, it doesn't exist. The words stung because they were true. Winter came to the high country. Snow fell. The village moved to lower elevations, to winter camps that had been used for generations. Thomas and Margaret moved with them. They were part of the community now, though still separate. Still students. Margaret was teaching Thomas the language in the evenings, sharing what she'd learned. She picked up the sounds faster, and her memory for vocabulary was sharper. Thomas appreciated the help, though it made him aware of how slowly he was learning. I'm too old, he said one night, frustrated after butchering another sentence. No, you're too impatient. Margaret's smile was tired but genuine. You want to master it like you mastered ranching. But ranching you learned over decades. You're trying to learn this in months. We only have a year. We have the time we have. Use it well. One night in deep winter, Dakia brought them to a ceremony. The whole village gathered in a large wickiup built, special for winter rituals. Thomas and Margaret sat at the edge, observers, but not quite participants. A shaman led the ceremony, an old woman whose face was a map of decades. She sang in a high, wavering voice. The words were too fast and too traditional for Thomas to follow, but he caught fragments. Creation, continuity, the sacred mountains. The people's place in the world. Afterward, Dakia explained. We were thanking the spirits for bringing us through another year. Asking for continued blessing. Remembering who we are and where we come from. It's beautiful, Margaret said quietly. Yes, but also necessary. This is how we stay people. How we remember we're not separate individuals fighting for ourselves, but part of something older. Something continuous. He looked at Thomas. Your people don't have this. You think you're all separate, all alone. This is why you could send those men away and think the debt was gone. Because you don't see yourselves as connected. Thomas had no answer. The observation cut too close. As winter deepened, Thomas found himself changing in ways he couldn't have predicted. His body adapted first. He grew leaner, harder. The Apache diet and constant movement stripped away the soft belly he'd developed in his 40s. His senses sharpened. He could hear things he'd never noticed before. The difference between wind through pine and wind through juniper. The sound of deer moving versus elk. The subtle shift in bird calls that meant a predator was near. But the deeper changes were in how he thought. He'd always considered himself a fair man. He paid his workers on time, didn't cheat his customers, helped neighbors when they needed it. But he'd also thought of fairness as a transaction. You work, I pay. You help me, I help you. Equal exchange, no debt remaining. The Apache didn't think that way. Every action created relationship. When someone gave you food, you didn't pay them back with equal food and call it even. You entered into a web of obligation and honor that might span years. The giving created connection. The receiving created responsibility. Nothing was ever truly settled because everything was ongoing. At first this had frustrated Thomas. It seemed inefficient, unclear. How could you do business if every transaction created endless obligation? But slowly he began to see the wisdom in it. The white man's way: clean transactions, debts settled, no strings. It created isolation. Everyone was separate. Everyone was alone. If you had money, you could buy anything. If you didn't, you had nothing. There was no middle ground, no web to catch you when you fell. The Apache way meant you were never truly alone. But it also meant you were never truly free of responsibility. The web supported you, but it also bound you. His men at White Rock had acted as if they were alone, as if their actions had no consequences beyond the immediate moment, as if killing strangers was no different than killing animals, a thing that happened and then was over. But nothing was ever over. Every action rippled outward. Every death diminished the web. Every violation had to be answered, not for revenge, but to restore balance, to keep the web intact. Thomas was beginning to understand why Dakia had set up the choice the way he had. It wasn't about punishment. It was about showing Thomas that his actions connected to others, that the women who worked for him were part of his web, whether he acknowledged it or not, that their lives and his life were braided together. By making him choose, Dakia had forced him to see the web, to see that you couldn't pretend people didn't matter just because you paid them wages instead of calling them family. Spring came late to the high country, but when it arrived, it came sudden and green. The village prepared to move back to the summer grounds. Thomas and Margaret had been with them for 7 months. They spoke Apache with increasing fluency, though Thomas still struggled with the subtle tense changes that Margaret handled easily. They knew the patterns of work and rest. They knew the stories. They knew the laws. One evening, Dakia brought a visitor to their wickiup. It was the old warrior who'd objected at the original gathering, the one who'd walked away when Thomas's new choice was accepted. His name was Nate, and his face was hard as winter stone. "I came to speak with you," Nate said in Apache. His words were formal, measured. "I came to say I was wrong." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Wrong about what?" "I thought you could not learn. I thought all whites were the same, blind, selfish, seeing only what they own. I wanted Dakia to kill you all, to show that whites cannot understand honor, cannot understand the old ways." Nature's jaw worked. "But you chose differently. And you stayed, and you learned. Not perfectly, not completely, but more than I believed possible." "I'm trying," Thomas said carefully. "Yes, you try. This matters." Naish looked at Margaret. "And you learn faster. You see more. I think you understand things he will never understand. But you stay to help him learn. This is also honor." Margaret inclined her head. "We're grateful for the teaching." "Don't be grateful yet." Nature's voice went flat. "Learning is the easy part. Living what you learned, this is hard. You will go back to your world soon. 5 more months. You will return to your ranch, your town, your people. And they will not understand what you understand. They will think you're strange, wrong, weak maybe. They will tell you to forget what you learned here, to go back to white man's thinking." "I won't forget," Thomas said. "Everyone says this. Few keep the promise." Nate stood. "I came to tell you, if you break the promise, if you go back and pretend this year never happened, if you let the old ways return, then the debt is unpaid. Then we will come for you again. Not to teach, to kill. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good." Nate moved to the entrance, then paused. "One more thing. Your 3 women, the ones who went free. They've been asking about you, sending messages. They want to know if you're alive, if you're well. Dakia sends word back sometimes. Tells them you're learning. They send messages too. Want you to know they're well. That they remember." Something warm moved in Thomas's chest. "They do?" "Family remembers," Nate said simply. "Even white family. Even family made of choice instead of blood. This is what you showed us. Maybe it's the most important thing you showed us." He left without waiting for a response. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkness thinking about Sarah, Emma, and Rosa, wondering what they were doing, whether they'd kept the ranch running, whether they thought about that day in the village center as often as he did. He wondered if they understood what had happened. That by stepping forward, by claiming the debt as shared, they'd saved all their lives. That their willingness to sacrifice had been what convinced Dakia there was another path. "You're thinking loudly," Margaret said from her side of the wickiup. "Sorry, don't be. I'm thinking too." She was quiet for a moment. "We've been here 7 months. It feels like 7 years. And also like 7 days. I know what you mean. Do you think we can do it? Go back and actually live differently? Teach what we've learned?" Thomas considered. "I don't know. But we have to try." "Yes," Margaret's voice was soft. "We have to try. Because if we don't, then those 3 women claimed a debt for nothing. Then this whole year meant nothing. Then Nature was right, and whites can't learn. No pressure then." Margaret laughed quietly. It was good to hear her laugh. She did it more now than she had at the ranch. Life here was harder in many ways, but also simpler. There was a freedom in knowing exactly what was expected, exactly where you fit in the pattern. Summer brought new lessons. Thomas learned to fight the Apache way, not the brawling he'd known as a young man, but something more controlled, more strategic. About reading your opponent, finding weakness, ending things quickly. He learned that fighting was always a last resort, because every fight, even when you won, diminished you and the community. Violence was a failure of other solutions. He learned to hunt with almost ritual precision. You didn't just kill an animal and take what you needed. You apologized to the spirit of the animal. You used every part. You gave thanks. You made the death mean something. Waste was worse than not hunting at all. He learned that leadership wasn't about giving orders. It was about living in a way that made people want to follow, about showing through action what values mattered, about being first to sacrifice and last to take comfort. Margaret learned the women's mysteries, the songs and ceremonies that only women knew. She learned midwifery, the care of the sick, the preparation of the dead. She learned that women held different power than men, but no less real. That the grandmother's word often mattered more than the warriors. That the ones who bore and raised and buried held the true continuity of the people. One day in late summer, a messenger came from another band. There had been a raid. White settlers had killed 3 Apache men who'd been hunting near the San Pedro River, killed them, and left their bodies unburied. The young warriors were calling for revenge, for war. Dakia gathered the village elders. Thomas and Margaret were not invited to the council, but they heard the debates raging late into the night. Some voices called for immediate retaliation, others urged caution. Still others argued that this proved nothing had changed, that whites would never honor the peace, that the only answer was to drive them all out. The council lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, Dakia came to find Thomas. "Walk with me," he said. They walked out of the village, into the hills above. The summer sun was hot but not cruel. Grasshoppers clicked in the brush. A hawk circled overhead, writing the thermals. "The council has asked me a question," Dakia said. "They want to know what you think we should do." Thomas stopped walking. "Why would my opinion matter?" "Because you're here, because you've learned, because you're white, and you might understand what those settlers were thinking. Were they acting alone? Were they sent by someone? Was it fear or hatred or something else?" Dakia's face was troubled. "We want to respond correctly, not just with anger, with the right kind of justice. But we don't understand your people well enough. We see what you do, but not why." Thomas thought carefully. "I'd need to know more. Where exactly did it happen? What were the circumstances? Were there witnesses?" "There's a woman, Mexican. She saw it from a distance. She says the Apache men were hunting deer. The settlers came upon them and started shooting. No words, no warning. Just shooting. Were the Apache armed? With bows?" "For hunting." Thomas felt sick. Then it was likely fear and stupidity. The settlers probably panicked. Saw armed Indians and thought they were about to be attacked. So they attacked first. And this makes it acceptable? No, it makes it understandable. There's a difference. Thomas met Dakia's eyes. Your people and mine have been killing each other for so long that everyone's afraid. Everyone expects violence. So the smallest thing, seeing armed men, hearing a noise in the dark, finding tracks near a homestead, it triggers panic. And panic makes people do terrible things. So we should do nothing? Forgive because they were afraid? No, you should demand justice. But justice that might actually work. Thomas took a breath. If you raid their settlement, kill their people in return, you'll feel better for a while. But then they'll raid back, and then you'll raid again. And it never ends. The war just gets bigger. Then what do we do? Find out who those settlers were, where they came from. Then send a delegation, including me, if you want, to their community. Demand that the killers be turned over for trial. Not Apache trial, not white trial, something in between. Something both sides can accept as fair. If they refuse, Thomas paused. If they refuse, then you have grounds for stronger action. But at least you'll have tried the other path first. Dakia was quiet for a long time. This is white man's law, he said finally. Talking, negotiating, it's not our way. It's not entirely our way either. Most whites would just call for revenge too. Thomas gestured back toward the village. But you said the point of my being here was to learn. To bridge the gap. Maybe this is the first test of whether I learned anything useful. Whether what I learned can actually stop the killing. Or make it worse, Dakia said quietly. If I take your advice and it fails, the young warriors will say I'm weak. That I've been corrupted by white thinking. They'll push for war anyway, and I won't be able to stop them, I know. But if you don't try, the war comes anyway. At least this way there's a chance. Another long silence. I'll bring your words to the council, Dakia said. The council debated for 2 more days. In the end, they decided to send a delegation. Not to demand the killers be turned over, that was too much to expect, but to meet with the settlement leaders and explain what had happened. To ask for acknowledgement, for apology, for some gesture that showed the killings were recognized as wrong. Thomas went with them, so did Margaret, as translator. Dakia led the delegation, along with 3 other men including Nach, and 2 women elders whose presence was meant to show this wasn't a war party. The ride took 4 days. They came to a small settlement in the grasslands east of the mountains, perhaps 40 families. A church, a general store, a few dozen houses scattered across the landscape, cattle ranches mostly, like Thomas's own place. The settlers saw them coming and panicked. Men grabbed rifles. Women gathered children. By the time the delegation reached the edge of town, they were faced with 24 armed men and a barricade of wagons. "We come to talk," Margaret called out in English. "We're not here to fight." That's what they always say right before the killing starts. Someone shouted back. "I'm white," Thomas said, riding forward slowly. "Thomas Bellamy. I ranch north of Broken Creek. I'm here as translator and witness. These people want to talk about 3 men who were killed 2 weeks ago on the San Pedro. They just want to talk." A man emerged from behind the wagons. He was perhaps 50, with a thick beard going gray and eyes that held too much suspicion. "I'm Mayor Hutchins. We didn't kill anybody. 3 Apache men were shot while hunting deer," Thomas said carefully. "There was a witness. The Apache aren't here for revenge. They're here to ask if you'll acknowledge what happened. If you'll help ensure it doesn't happen again. You're riding with savages and telling us how to act?" Hutchins's voice rose. "You know what they do? You know how many of our people they've killed over the years." "I know," Thomas said quietly. "I also know the same question could be asked the other direction. How many of their people have we killed? We can count grievances all day. Or we can try to stop adding to the count. By doing what? Letting them ride in here and make demands?" Dakia spoke then, in clear English that surprised everyone. "We demand nothing. We ask only that you see us as people. That you see our dead as dead that matter. Same as yours. When white men die, you grieve. You bury with ceremony, you remember. When our men die, you act like animals were removed from a field. This is not acceptable. This is not law. This is not even human." His words fell into silence. 3 weeks ago, the Kia continued, 3 of our young men were hunting. They had families. They had children. They were teaching the youngest how to track deer in dry season. Your men came upon them and started shooting. No warning, no words. Just death. The youngest boy was 17. He died trying to protect his uncle. "This is who you killed." "We didn't," Hutchins started. "Someone from your settlement did." The witness was clear. She described the men. She described the horses. "They came from this direction." Dakia's voice stayed level. "We're not here to demand you turn them over. We're not fools. We know you won't do that. We're here to ask if you'll admit it happened. If you'll promise to teach your people better. If you'll work to ensure it doesn't happen again." Mayor Hutchins looked at the men around him. Several wouldn't meet his eyes. That told Thomas everything he needed to know. They knew who'd done it. They might have even known it was coming. "And if we say yes?" Hutchins asked carefully. "If we acknowledge this happened and promise to be more careful, what then?" "Then we go home," Dakia said simply. "Then we tell our young warriors that your people are not all killers. That some of you can learn. That there's a path that isn't war. This is all we want. This is all we've ever wanted. To be seen. To be treated as people who matter." The silence stretched. Thomas could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. The wrong word from anyone would tip it into violence. The settlers were scared and angry. The Apache were grieving and insulted. All it would take was one gun going off, one arrow drawn, one person deciding that talk was worthless. Finally, Mayor Hutchins lowered his rifle. "I can't speak for whoever did this," he said slowly. "But I can say that if it happened the way you describe, it was wrong. And I can promise to make it known that shooting people on sight isn't acceptable, even when we're scared." It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was something. Dakia nodded once. "This is a beginning, small but real. We accept your words. We'll be watching to see if they're matched by actions. If more of our people die without cause, we will remember this conversation. We will remember you promised better." "Understood." The delegation turned their horses and rode away slowly. No one shot at them. No one shouted insults. It was the smallest possible gesture toward peace, but it was genuine. When they were a mile out of town, Nate spoke. "That was a risk." "Yes," Dakia agreed. "It might not work. They might kill more of our people anyway." "Yes, but we tried," one of the women elders said. "We tried the path that doesn't end in everyone dying. This is worth something." They rode back to the village in silence, each processing what had happened in their own way. Thomas felt exhausted, not from the ride, but from the weight of almost violence, of standing between two groups who had every reason to hate each other and trying to build a bridge from inadequate materials. He didn't know if what they'd done would matter, didn't know if Mayor Hutchins would keep his word, didn't know if the settlers who'd done the killing would be punished or just hidden. But they'd tried. They'd offered a path that wasn't war, and it hadn't been rejected outright. That was more than Thomas had expected. That night, Dakia came to their wickiup again. "You did well today," he said. "Both of you." Margaret's translation was precise. "And Thomas, your words helped. You showed the settlers that not all whites think the same way. That some can learn. This mattered." "Will it be enough?" Thomas asked. "I don't know. But it's more than we had before." Dakia settled on his heels. "Your year is almost finished. 1 more month. Then you're free to go. But I want to ask you something first." "Go ahead." "When you return to your ranch, to your life, what will you do? Will you tell people what you learned here? Will you try to change how whites and Apache interact, or will you go quiet? Keep your head down? Pretend this year never happened?" Thomas had been thinking about this for weeks. "I'll tell them. I'll tell anyone who'll listen about your laws. About why the land matters differently to you. About how every killing creates more killing unless someone breaks the pattern. He paused. I'll probably lose business. People will think I've gone soft, or that I've been corrupted. But I'll tell them anyway. You might lose more than business, Dakia said quietly. You might lose everything. White men don't forgive those who side with the Apache, even a little bit. Even reasonably. I know, and yet you'll do it anyway. I have to. Otherwise this year meant nothing. Otherwise those 3 women claimed a debt for no reason. Otherwise I'm still the same man who sent his killers away with wages and called it justice. Dakia smiled slightly. You have learned. Not everything, not even most things. But the most important thing, that staying silent is also a choice. That doing nothing is also an action. That every moment you could speak truth and don't. You're choosing the lie. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. When you go back, your 3 women, Sarah, Emma, Rosa, they'll want to know what happened to you here. What you learned. Don't protect them from the truth. Don't make it soft or easy to hear. Tell them plainly. They earned that right when they stepped forward to share your debt. They're part of this now. They should know what this is. After he left, Margaret spoke into the darkness. Are you ready to go back? No, Thomas admitted. I'm not. Life here is hard, but it's clear. I know what's expected. I know where I fit. Going back to the ranch, to the town, to people who'll think I'm crazy or weak or corrupted. I'm not ready for that. Me neither, Margaret said softly. But ready or not, we go. Because that was the agreement. Because the debt requires it. Because, she trailed off. Because if we don't go back and try, then we're just hiding. Just like you hid after White Rock. Different kind of hiding, but still hiding. And we both know better now. The last month passed too quickly and too slowly at once. Thomas and Margaret were given new clothes for the return journey. Traditional Apache garments, carefully made, representing their status as students who'd completed their year. It was an honor, though Thomas wasn't sure how the gesture would be received back in Broken Creek. White man in Apache clothes. That would cause talk. The village prepared a ceremony for their departure. It was held at dawn, with the whole community gathered. The shaman who'd led the winter ceremony spoke words Thomas mostly understood now. She talked about bridges. About the courage it took to walk between worlds. About how the people had learned from these 2 students, even as the students learned from the people. They came here as payment for debt, she said in Apache, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. They leave as something else, not Apache. They can never be Apache. But not quite white in the old way either. They are between. And between is where change lives, where new paths are found. We honor them for their courage. We honor them for their stubbornness. We honor them for not breaking when breaking would have been easier. She gave them each a gift. For Thomas, a knife with an antler handle, carved with symbols that represented learning and sacrifice. For Margaret, a woven basket in the traditional style, representing the women's knowledge she'd been trusted with. Carry these, the shaman said. Remember where they came from. Remember what they mean. And when your people ask why you have them, tell the truth. Don't hide. Don't soften. Tell the truth plainly, and let them decide what to do with it. The Kia was the last to speak with them. The horses you came on are yours to keep, he said. Also food for the journey and water. You know the way back you learned the landmarks this year. But we'll send 2 men with you anyway, to ensure you reach your land safely. Not because we don't trust you, but because the land between here and there is dangerous. Better to be cautious. Thank you, Thomas said. He wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if you actually do what you promised. If you go back and change things. If you make this year mean something. Dakia gripped Thomas's shoulder briefly. I believe you'll try. I don't know if you'll succeed. The forces against you are strong. Your own people will fight you harder than we ever did. but I believe you'll try. That's enough for now." He turned to Margaret. "You surprised me most of all. I thought you'd come here to survive, to endure until the year was done. Instead you learned deeply, truly. The women tell me you could live here permanently if you wished, that you've earned that right. That's rare for an outsider." Margaret's eyes were bright. "I've thought about staying, but you won't." "No, I made a promise, and Thomas will need help. He learned much, but I learned more. Together we might actually reach people. Apart," she shrugged. "Together you're stronger," Dakia agreed. "This is something else you learned this year. The White Way says everyone stands alone, but you two learned you're stronger connected. Stronger as family, even family made of choice. Remember this when things get hard. Remember you don't have to carry the burden alone." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Thomas looked back once. The village was already returning to its daily patterns. Children playing, women working, men preparing for a hunt, life continuing as it had for generations. He'd been part of that life for a year, but now he was separate again. The bridge was crossed, and there was no going back. The two escorts were young men, quiet and efficient. They rode with the casual competence of people born to the saddle and the land. They didn't talk much, but when they did, they used Apache. It was a test, Thomas realized, checking if he'd really learned or if he'd just pretended. He answered in Apache, haltingly but clearly enough. The escorts nodded approval. On the third day, they reached the edge of Apache territory. The escorts stopped. "From here you go alone," one said in Apache. "You know the way. You know the land. You're not lost anymore." "No," Thomas agreed. "Not lost. Remember what you learned." "I will." They turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, disappearing into the landscape like smoke. Thomas and Margaret rode on. The land changed as they traveled. The high desert gave way to grasslands. The grasslands gave way to the rolling country Thomas knew. They passed landmarks he recognized, the split rock, the dry wash, the fence line that marked the eastern edge of his property. Home, except it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place he'd lived once, a long time ago when he was a different person. They came to the ranch house at sunset on the fifth day. It looked the same, the house, the barn, the corrals, but also different in ways Thomas couldn't immediately name. Cleaner, maybe. Better maintained. Someone had painted the trim. Someone had fixed the sagging gate on the horse pen. Sarah Greenwood stepped out onto the porch. She saw them and froze. For a moment neither side moved. Then Sarah was running, and Emma and Rosa were emerging from the house behind her, and the three women were pulling Thomas and Margaret off their horses and hugging them and crying and talking all at once. "We thought, we weren't sure. The messages said you were alive, but we didn't. You're so thin. Your hair. Are you hurt?" Thomas tried to answer and couldn't. He was crying too hard. Margaret was surrounded by the other three women, all of them touching her as if to confirm she was real. Finally, they separated enough to breathe. "Come inside," Sarah said firmly. "You both look half-starved. We'll feed you and then you'll tell us everything. Every single thing." The ranch house kitchen was exactly as Thomas remembered, except Rosa had added curtains and Sarah had organized the pantry with military precision. They sat him down at the table, his table, except it felt like someone else's, and brought food. Real food. Bread and butter and beef stew and coffee with sugar. It tasted strange, too rich, too much. After a year of corn mush and dried meat and wild plants, this meal felt almost obscene. But he ate because the women were watching, and because his body needed it, and because refusing would hurt their feelings. Emma sat across from him, just staring. "You look so different," she said quietly. "Older, but also," she struggled for the word, "clearer somehow. Like you know exactly who you are now." "I'm not sure that's true," Thomas said. "I'm not sure of much anymore." "Tell us," Rosa said. "Tell us everything that happened." So he did. He told them about the village, the learning, the language lessons, about the Kia and Nach and the shaman, about the winter ceremonies and the summer hunts, about learning to see the land differently, to understand law differently, to think about debt and family and choice differently. Margaret filled in the parts he missed or didn't know how to explain. She told them about the women's work, the songs, the ceremonies, about learning that power came in many forms, about understanding that what the whites called savagery was actually a different kind of civilization, one that had sustained itself for longer than European culture had existed. The three women listened without interrupting. When Thomas got to the part about the delegation to the settlement, about standing between two armed groups and trying to build peace, Sarah leaned forward. Did it work? Did they listen? A little bit, maybe, it's hard to say. Thomas rubbed his face. The mayor promised to try to keep his people from killing on sight. But promises are easy. Actually doing it is hard. I don't know if anything really changed. You tried, Sarah said firmly. That's more than most would do. Is it enough? I don't know. But it's something. The conversation stretched late into the night. Thomas told them about Takia's warning, that if he went back to the old ways, the debt would be considered unpaid. That he had to actually change things or this year meant nothing. So what will you do? Emma asked. I'm going to tell people, everyone, what I learned, why it matters. How the Apache aren't savages, but people with a different kind of law. How we need to find a way to live together instead of killing each other. They'll hate you for it, Sarah said quietly. I know. You'll lose business, friends, maybe the ranch itself. I know. Sarah nodded slowly. Then we'll help, all of us. We're family, right? That's what you showed us that day in the village. We're family. And family doesn't abandon family when things get hard. Thomas felt his throat tighten. You don't have to. Yes, we do, Emma interrupted. We stepped forward that day to share your debt. That didn't end when they let us go. We're part of this now. Part of whatever comes next. I have grandchildren, Rosa said softly. I want them to grow up in a world with less killing. If that means helping you change people's minds, then that's what I'll do. Margaret was crying silently. Sarah put an arm around her shoulders. Your family too, Sarah told her. You went with him. You learned with him. You're part of this. You have a place here as long as you want it. I want it, Margaret whispered. They sat together in the kitchen as the night deepened outside. Thomas looked around the table at the four women, 3 who'd been willing to die for him, 1 who'd actually gone through the year with him and felt something settle in his chest. He'd thought family was blood, marriage and children and ancestors, but blood family was just one kind. This was another kind, made of choice and sacrifice and shared experience. Made of crisis survived together. Maybe it was even stronger than blood family, because you had to choose it, had to decide it was real, had to make it mean something through your actions. Tomorrow, Sarah said finally, we'll start figuring out what comes next, but tonight, you both need to rest. Actually rest. You're home now. You're safe. Sleep in real beds for the first time in a year. Tomorrow's soon enough for saving the world. Thomas slept in his own bed that night. It felt strange. Too soft, too isolated. He'd grown used to sleeping in a wickiup with Margaret nearby, with the sounds of the village all around. This silence felt wrong, empty. But he was home. Or what passed for home now. Morning came with the smell of bacon and coffee. Thomas dressed in his old clothes. They hung loose now, too big for his leaner frame, and came downstairs to find the whole household already awake and working. Sarah was cooking. Rosa was mending a shirt. Emma was doing accounts at the kitchen table. Margaret was outside talking to the ranch hands. It looked domestic, peaceful, normal. But Thomas could feel the tension underneath. Everyone was waiting to see what he'd do next. Whether he'd actually follow through on what he'd said last night, or whether the comfort of home would make him reconsider. Gathered the hands, Margaret said when she came back inside. Told them you wanted to talk to everyone. They're in the barn. Thomas nodded and headed out. The barn held about 15 men, the core crew who kept the ranch running. He recognized them all, men he'd hired over the years. Some had been with him since before Mary died. They were weathered, practical men who knew cattle and horses and hard work. They looked at him with expressions ranging from confusion to wariness to something like concern. "I know I look different," Thomas said without preamble. "I am different. I spent the past year living with the Chiricahua Apache, learning their language, their customs, their law. I did it because my men killed 2 of their people at White Rock 3 years ago, and I sent those men away without facing justice. The debt came due. I paid it by learning." Silence. The men glanced at each other. "I'm telling you this," Thomas continued, "because things are going to change around here. We're not going to treat Apache land like it's ours to use. We're not going to kill on sight. We're going to learn to tell the difference between a war party and a hunting party. We're going to see the Apache as people, not vermin. And if anyone has a problem with that, you can collect your wages now and leave." One of the older hands, a man named Peterson, spoke up. "You gone soft, boss? Spent too long with the savages?" "I spent long enough to learn they're not savages. They're people with a different way of living, different laws, different values, but not less human, not less worthy of respect." Thomas met Peterson's eyes. "And no, I haven't gone soft. I've gotten harder. Because now I know what the alternative looks like. Endless war, endless killing. Generation after generation dying for land that'll outlast us all. I'm tired of it. I want to try something different." "Different how?" another hand asked. "Different like we actually talk to them when there's a problem. Like we learn which water sources they consider sacred and we avoid them. Like we don't shoot first and ask questions never. Like we act as if peace is possible." Thomas paused. "I know it sounds crazy. I know most of you think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have, but I'm asking you to try it anyway, for a while. See if it works." Peterson shook his head. "They'll see it as weakness. They'll take advantage. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see it as strength. As someone actually trying to do the hard thing instead of the easy thing." Thomas looked around the barn. "Any of you ever stop to think why we're still fighting after all these years? Why the wars never end? It's because both sides keep doing the same thing over and over. Kill them, they kill us, we kill them back. It never stops. Someone has to step off that path. Might as well be us." The men were quiet, processing this. Finally, a younger hand named Crawford spoke. "I'll stay. I'll try it your way. Can't hurt to see if it works." One by one, the others agreed. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but none walked away. Thomas took that as a victory, small as it was. Over the next weeks, Thomas established new rules for the ranch. No one was to fire on Apache unless fired upon first. All water usage was to be carefully considered. If a source might be disputed, they'd find another. Any encounters with Apache were to be reported to Thomas immediately, and he'd handle the talking. The town of Broken Creek was harder. Thomas rode in 2 weeks after his return, Margaret beside him. They were still wearing the Apache clothes they'd been given, having decided that hiding what they'd done was the coward's path. Better to be honest and face the consequences. The consequences came quickly. People stared, whispered, crossed the street to avoid them. The general store owner refused to serve them until Thomas threatened to take his business elsewhere. The blacksmith actually spat at Margaret's feet. "Traitor," he said. "Apache lover." "Yes," Thomas said calmly, "I am. Because I learned they're worth loving, worth respecting. And if you spent any time actually talking to them instead of shooting them, you might learn the same." They made enemies that day. But they also found a few unexpected allies. The schoolteacher, a woman named Elizabeth Hartley, approached them as they were leaving the general store. She was perhaps 40, unmarried, with intelligent eyes and a direct manner. "I heard what you did," she said, "what you learned. Would you be willing to speak about it? To the children at the school?" "I think," she paused, I think the next generation needs to hear a different story than the one their parents are telling. Thomas considered. Speaking to children meant shaping how they'd think about Apache in the future. It was exactly the kind of long-term change Dakia had talked about. Yes, he said. I'll speak. He gave his first talk 3 days later. 27 children, ages 6 to 14, sitting on benches in the one-room schoolhouse. Thomas stood at the front, more nervous than he'd been facing armed settlers. I'm going to tell you about my year with the Apache, he began. But first, I want to ask you a question. How many of you have ever met an Apache person? No hands went up. How many of you have heard stories about Apache? Every hand went up. And in those stories, are the Apache good people or bad people? Bad, several children shouted. Why are they bad? They kill people. They steal. They're savages. Thomas nodded. Those are the stories you've been told. Now I'm going to tell you different stories, true stories, about the year I lived with them, about what I learned. And then you can decide for yourselves what's true. He told them about Dakia, about the village, about learning that Apache children played games and laughed and got in trouble just like white children, about learning that Apache parents loved their children just as fiercely, about learning that they had laws and honor and ceremonies and all the things that made people human. The children listened, rapt. When he finished, a girl of about 10 raised her hand. But they do kill people. My uncle was killed by Apache raiders. I know, Thomas said gently, and I'm sorry for your loss. The Apache have killed many white people. But white people have killed many Apache too. My own ranch hands killed an old Apache man and his 9-year-old grandson. Does that make all white people bad? Or just those specific men who did the killing? The girl frowned, thinking. Just those men, I guess. Exactly. Same with Apache. Some do bad things. But that doesn't mean all of them are bad. It means we need to judge people by their actions, not by what group they belong to. After the talk, Miss Hartley thanked him. You did well. Some of them were really listening, really thinking. That's all we can ask, but not everyone was pleased. That night, someone threw a rock through the window of Thomas's ranch house. A note was attached. Apache lover. Leave or die. Sarah found it the next morning. She brought it to Thomas without comment. It's starting, he said quietly. Yes. Are you scared? Terrified, Sarah said honestly, but also angry. And stubborn. I don't take well to threats. She looked at the note again. We should report this to the sheriff. They did. The sheriff, a man named Hollis, was sympathetic but unhelpful. I'll ask around, he said. But Thomas, you have to understand. People are scared. They've lost family to Apache raids. They don't understand why you'd spend a year with them. They think you've betrayed your own people. I'm trying to stop more people from dying, Thomas said. I know, but fear makes people stupid and dangerous. You need to be careful. Very careful. The warnings escalated over the next month. More broken windows. Graffiti painted on the barn. One of the ranch hands quit, saying his family was pressuring him to leave. Thomas's credit at the bank was quietly canceled. Several business relationships ended without explanation. Emma kept careful track of the financial damage. We're losing money, she reported one evening. Not enough to sink us yet, but if this continues, it'll continue, Thomas said. The question is whether we can outlast it. Margaret had started teaching Apache language to anyone who'd listen. A few people came, mostly women, interestingly. Women who'd lost husbands or sons to the fighting and wanted to understand the enemy better. Women who were tired of the killing. It was slow work, but it was work. 6 months after Thomas's return, Dakia came to visit. He arrived with 2 warriors, riding openly in daylight. It was a calculated risk, a statement. Thomas met them at the edge of his property. You're either very brave or very foolish, Thomas said in Apache. Dakia smiled, probably both. I came to see if you kept your promise. If you're actually trying to change things, I'm trying. I don't know if it's working. They rode to the ranch house together. Sarah and Rosa and Emma and Margaret came out to meet them. The three women who'd been captured stared at Dakia, the man who'd put them through that terrible day, with expressions Thomas couldn't read. Dakia looked at them steadily. "I owe you an apology. What I did to you was cruel. Necessary, perhaps, but still cruel. You did nothing wrong and yet suffered for Thomas's debt. I'm sorry." Sarah's jaw tightened. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, "I'm not ready to forgive you. Maybe I never will be. But I understand why you did it, and I see that it worked. Thomas is different. Better. So maybe the cruelty bought something worth having. I don't know yet." "That's fair," Dakia said. They fed the Apache visitors and talked late into the night. Dakia reported that there'd been no more killings in their territory since the delegation to the settlement. The peace was fragile, but holding. "Your words helped," Dakia said. "The settlers see that not all whites want war. Some of my young warriors see that not all whites are the same. It's small progress, but it's real. Thomas is paying a price for it," Margaret said. "His own people are turning against him. Yes, this is how it always is. The peacemakers are hated by both sides. Too white for Apache. Too Apache for whites. You live in the between place. It's lonely there, but necessary," Thomas said. "Yes, necessary." Before Dakia left, he gave Thomas another gift. A woven band meant to be worn around the wrist. "This marks you as a friend to the people. If any Apache see this, they'll know to talk before shooting. It won't protect you from everyone. Some won't care. Some won't recognize it, but it's something. Thank you. Don't thank me. Wear it. Honor it. And keep trying to build bridges, even when it feels impossible." Especially when it feels impossible, they rode away at dawn. Thomas watched them go and felt the weight of the promise settle heavier on his shoulders. The second year was harder than the first. More threats. More vandalism. Thomas lost 3 more ranch hands. His cattle sold for less at market because his brand was tainted. Emma had to get creative with the accounts to keep them solvent. But there were victories too, small as they were. Miss Hartley's students wrote essays about what they'd learned. A few other ranchers quietly started adopting Thomas's water policies. No more using disputed springs. No more shooting on sight. It wasn't much, but it was movement. A traveling minister came through Broken Creek and heard about Thomas's story. He invited Thomas to speak at a church gathering. Half the congregation walked out in protest, but half stayed. And a few came up afterward to say they'd been thinking the same things, but hadn't had the courage to say so. Margaret started a small school at the ranch, teaching Apache language and customs to anyone interested. 6 people came regularly, then 8, then 12. They were mostly women, mostly older, mostly tired of losing sons and husbands to endless war. Sarah opened a small cafe in town. It barely broke even, but it gave her a platform. She'd tell stories about Thomas's year with the Apache to anyone who'd listen. Some people stopped coming. Others came specifically because of the stories. Rosa worked with the local church, trying to build relationships between the Mexican families, who often had complex relationships with the Apache themselves and the white community. She argued that if Mexicans and Apache could sometimes live peacefully, whites and Apache could learn to do the same. Emma used her accounting skills to help other small ranchers and farmers. In return, she'd quietly suggest they adopt some of Thomas's policies. Not framing it as politics, just as practical measures that reduced conflict. Some listened. It was slow, grinding work. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But it was work. 2 years after Thomas's return, a young Apache man rode to the ranch alone. He was wounded, shot in the shoulder, barely staying on his horse. He collapsed in the yard. Margaret ran out first, shouting for help. They brought him inside. Rosa, who had some medical knowledge, cleaned and bound the wound. It was bad but not fatal if infection didn't set in. When he woke, he spoke in Apache. Margaret translated. "He says there was a raid. White settlers attacked an Apache camp, killed women and children. He was hunting nearby and rode toward the sound. Got shot running away. He came here because he saw Thomas wearing the friendship band once, months ago. Remembered. Hoped for help. Thomas felt cold dread settle in his gut. Where was the raid? South. Near the canyon country. How many dead? He doesn't know. Many. He saw bodies. Heard screaming. This was the nightmare scenario. Everything Thomas had been trying to prevent. If an Apache camp had been massacred, the retaliation would be massive. All the fragile peace-building would shatter. We need to find out what happened, Thomas said. Get the real story. Then maybe we can stop the war that's coming. How? Sarah asked. The same way as before. Ride to both sides. Get the truth. Try to find a path that isn't total war. That nearly got you killed last time, Emma said. This time it might actually succeed. Probably, but I have to try, Margaret stood. I'll go with you. You'll need a translator. Margaret, don't argue. You need me and you know it. Sarah looked at Rosa and Emma. Something passed between them without words. Then Sarah nodded. We'll hold things here. Keep the ranch running. If you die, at least you'll die knowing we kept your work alive. That's remarkably morbid, Thomas said. But true. They left at first light. The young Apache man tied to his horse, but conscious. Margaret rode beside Thomas. They headed south, toward the canyon country, following the wounded man's directions. They found the camp on the second day. Or what was left of it, wickiups burned to frames. Bodies left where they'd fallen. Women, children, elders. The warriors had apparently been away hunting when the attack came. The raiders had targeted the defenseless. Thomas felt bile rise in his throat. This wasn't war. This was murder, massacre. Margaret was crying silently, moving between the bodies, looking for survivors. She found one, a girl, maybe 7, hiding in the brush. The child was unharmed physically, but shaking with shock. We need to leave, the wounded man said urgently. When the warriors return and find this, they'll kill anyone nearby, anyone white. They won't ask questions. Then we find them first, Thomas said. Before they see this. Try to talk to them. You can't talk to grief this big. This rage. I have to try. They rode harder, circling the camp's perimeter, looking for the hunting party. They found them returning at dusk, 15 warriors, carrying deer and elk, laughing about the day's success. The laughter died when they saw Thomas and Margaret. Weapons came up instantly. Thomas raised his hands, showing the friendship band Dakia had given him. I bring news, he said in Apache, his voice carrying. Bad news. Your camp was attacked. Many dead. I came to tell you before you saw it. To help if I can. The lead warrior, Thomas, recognized him from his year in the village, stared at the band, then at Thomas's face. You lie. Who would attack our camp? White raiders. They came while you hunted. They killed the defenseless and left. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But before you see it, before the rage takes you, I need you to listen. I need you to hear me. Why should we listen to you? You're white. This was whites. Because I know who did it, Thomas said. And I know where they are. And I know how to make them pay without starting a war that kills everyone. But you have to let me try. The warrior's face was stone. Take us to the camp. If I take you to the camp first, you'll be too full of grief and rage to think. You'll ride out and kill every white you find, and they'll kill back. And it never ends. Please, trust me. Let me try another way. Why would we trust you? Because Dakia trusted me. Because I lived with your people for a year. Because I learned your laws. Because I'm wearing the friendship band. Because Thomas searched for words. Because if we don't try something different, we'll all drown in blood. Yours and mine. And I'm tired of drowning. The warriors conferred in rapid Apache, too fast for Thomas to follow completely. But he caught the gist. Some wanted to kill him immediately. Others wanted to see the camp first. A few were willing to listen, at least briefly. Finally, the lead warrior spoke. "You have until morning. Tell us your plan. If it's foolish, you die, and we take revenge our way. If it has merit, we'll consider it. That's all I promise." Thomas nodded. It was more than he'd hoped for. He explained quickly. The young man who'd come to his ranch had described the raiders. Specific details, horses with particular markings, one man with a distinctive scar, a wagon with a broken wheel spoke that made a clicking sound. Thomas knew those details. He knew whose ranch those descriptions matched. A man named Pritchard, a rancher 3 counties south, known for his hatred of Apache, known for advocating extermination. Thomas had met him once and been disturbed by the casual way Pritchard spoke of killing as if it were pest control. "I'll go to him," Thomas said. "I'll confront him. I'll make him confess in front of witnesses. Then we'll bring him to justice. Real justice. Not vigilante justice, but law that both our peoples can accept. And if he doesn't confess, then I'll make him, one way or another. And if your white law protects him? If your courts say killing Apache isn't murder." Thomas met the warrior's eyes. "Then I'll turn him over to you. To your justice. And I'll testify to my own people what he did and why he deserved what he got." The risk was enormous. Turning a white man over to Apache justice would make Thomas a traitor in most people's eyes. But it was the only way to show both sides that justice mattered more than skin color. The warrior considered. "You would do this? Betray your own people? He's not my people. Not anymore. He stopped being my people when he killed children. When he violated every law that matters, yours and mine both." Thomas's voice hardened. "If my people can't see that killing children is wrong regardless of whose children they are, then maybe I don't want to be their people anymore." A long silence fell. Then the warrior nodded once. "You have 3 days. Get the confession. Bring witnesses. Bring proof. If you succeed, we'll accept your justice. If you fail," he left the threat unfinished. "Understood." Margaret looked at Thomas as they rode away. "You know this is probably suicide." "Yes. And you're doing it anyway." "Yes. Why?" Thomas thought about the question. About the girl Margaret had found hiding in the brush. About the bodies left lying in the destroyed camp. About the endless cycle of killing that had defined this territory for generations. "Because someone has to," he said finally. "Someone has to be willing to stand in the middle and say, enough, even if it gets them killed. Especially if it gets them killed. Because maybe if enough people see someone willing to die to stop the killing, they'll start to think differently. That's a lot of hope to hang on a maybe. It's all the hope I have." They rode through the night, pushing the horses harder than was wise. Reached Pritchard's ranch by dawn of the second day. The ranch was large, well-maintained, prosperous. Pritchard had money and influence. This wouldn't be simple. Thomas rode straight to the main house and pounded on the door. Pritchard himself answered. He was a big man, running to fat now in his 50s, with a thick beard and small, cold eyes. When he saw Thomas in Apache clothing, his face twisted with disgust. "Bellamy, heard you'd gone savage. Didn't believe it till now. I need to talk to you about a raid 2 days ago. Apache camp in the Canyon country. Women and children killed." Pritchard's face didn't change. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. I have a witness who described the raiders. The horses, the wagon. It was your men. Maybe you yourself. That's a serious accusation. Got any proof?" "Not yet. But I will. And when I do, I'm bringing the law down on you. Real law. The kind that matters." Pritchard laughed. "The law? For killing savages?" "Bellamy, you really have gone mad. There's no law against clearing vermin off land that should be white land anyway." Thomas felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest. "So you admit it." "I admit nothing. But hypothetically, if someone did clean out an Apache nest, they'd be doing the territory a favor. Making it safe for decent people. Decent people don't kill children. Apache whelps grow up to be Apache raiders. Better to end them early. Pritchard's smile was ugly. "But like I said, I don't know anything about any raid. And you can't prove otherwise." Thomas turned to leave, then paused. "I'll give you one chance. Come forward, confess, face justice. If you do, I'll argue for mercy, for understanding. I'll try to find a punishment both sides can accept. But if you hide, if you make me hunt you down and prove it, there'll be no mercy. Only law, and law is harsher than mercy ever is. Get off my land, Apache lover. Before I have my men shoot you for trespassing." Thomas rode away. Margaret was waiting at the property line. Did he confess? Basically, but not in a way I can use. He knows I can't prove it. So what now? Now we find proof. They spent the rest of the day and all night gathering evidence. They found the wagon with the broken spoke in Pritchard's barn. They found the specific horses the wounded man had described, distinctive white markings on the forelocks. They found a ranch hand willing to talk after Margaret offered him money and safe passage out of the territory. The hand confirmed everything. Pritchard had organized the raid personally, had called it clearing out a nest of vipers, had taken pleasure in the killing, had laughed about the children begging. Thomas felt sick hearing it. But he documented everything, got the hand to sign a written statement, got a description of the other raiders. On the morning of the third day, he rode to the county sheriff's office. Not Sheriff Hollis from Broken Creek, he didn't trust Hollis to act. Instead, the territorial marshal, a man named Davies who'd served as an army officer before taking the marshal job. Davies listened to the evidence with a stony expression. "This is ugly," he said finally. "If it's true, and your evidence is compelling, then Pritchard committed murder. Multiple counts. The law's the law, even when the victims are Apache. Will you arrest him?" "I will. But Bellamy, you need to understand something. Even if I arrest him, even if we get him to trial, there's not a jury in this territory that'll convict a white man for killing Apache. You know that. Then I'll testify to the Apache warriors waiting for justice. I'll tell them that white law failed. And I'll turn Pritchard over to their law. I promised them 3 days. I have 2 hours left." Davy stared at him. "You'd do that? Turn an American citizen over to savages. He murdered children. If American law won't punish that, then American law is worthless. And yes, I'll do it. I gave my word." The marshal was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "All right. Let's go arrest a child killer. And God help us all for what comes after." They rode with a posse of 6 men to Pritchard's ranch. Pritchard saw them come in and barricaded himself in his house with a dozen hands loyal to him or scared of him. The standoff lasted 4 hours. Finally, Marshal Davies shouted, "Pritchard, come out or we're coming in. You're under arrest for murder." "I killed savages. That's not murder. The law says otherwise. Come out now and you get a trial. Make us come in and you'll be lucky to survive it." More silence. Then gunfire erupted from the house. One of the posse members went down, shot in the leg. The posse returned fire. The battle was brief but brutal. When it ended, 3 of Pritchard's men were dead. Pritchard himself had taken a bullet to the shoulder but was alive. They dragged him out of the house, bleeding and cursing. "You'll hang for this, Bellamy," he screamed. "You and your Apache whore, traitors. Both of you traitors." Thomas ignored him. He had 1 hour left. They needed to ride. They reached the designated meeting place, a flat clearing visible from 3 directions, with minutes to spare. The Apache warriors were already there, mounted and armed. The lead warrior looked at Pritchard, then at Thomas. "This is the man? This is the man. We have a witness who rode with him. We have physical evidence. We have his own words, almost a confession. Almost. He was smart enough not to fully confess where it could be used legally. But Marshal Davies here arrested him anyway. The law will try him." The warrior shook his head. "White law will free him. You know this." "Maybe, probably." Thomas took a breath. "But I made a promise. If white law fails, I'll turn him over to your justice. I'll testify to what he did. I'll accept the consequences of that choice. Marshal Davies spoke up. I'll testify too. If the jury acquits him, if they say killing Apache children isn't murder, then I'll resign my post and tell the world why. And I'll step aside when you come for him. The warrior studied them both. You would risk this, both of you? Yes, Thomas said. Because some things are more important than which side you're on. Justice is one of those things. Another long silence. Then Dakia rode forward from the group. Thomas hadn't seen him initially. He'd been in the back, watching. Thomas Bellamy, Dakia said. You kept your promise. You tried to bridge the gap. You brought the killer to justice, or as close as your law allows. This is more than I expected. More than I hoped for. It's not enough. He should hang. Yes, but you tried. You risked your own life and honor to try. That means something. Dakia looked at the other warriors. I say we let white law try first. If it fails, we'll act. But we give them a chance to prove their law has meaning. This is what Thomas has been teaching us, that not all whites are the same, that some actually value justice over race. Let them prove it, the lead warrior argued. Others joined in. The debate was heated, conducted in Apache too rapid for Thomas to follow. But eventually, they came to agreement. We accept, the lead warrior said. White law tries him first, but know this, we'll be watching. If he walks free, if your law says Apache lives don't matter, then we come for him. And for anyone who protects him, and then the war starts for real. No more peace talks, no more bridges. Just blood. Understood, Thomas said. Pritchard's trial began 6 weeks later. It was held in the territorial capital, in a courtroom packed with spectators. Half wanted to see Pritchard hang. Half wanted to see him freed and Thomas arrested for treason. Thomas testified for 3 hours. Described the evidence, the massacre, the witness statements. Margaret testified about what they'd found. The ranch hand who'd been present testified about Pritchard's planning and execution of the raid. Pritchard's lawyer argued that Apache weren't protected under territorial law, that they were hostile enemies. That killing them was no different than killing wolves or coyotes. That Pritchard was a patriot defending white settlers from savages. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They came back with a verdict, guilty of murder. The courtroom erupted, half cheered, half screamed in outrage. The judge had to threaten to clear the room before order was restored. Pritchard was sentenced to hang. Thomas felt no satisfaction. Just a tired relief that the system had worked, barely. That law had meant something, even if only this once. But outside the courtroom, a man spat at him, traitor. You sold out your own kind. No, Thomas said quietly. I defended everyone. That's what law is supposed to do. The hanging was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Thomas didn't attend. He'd done his part. He didn't need to watch the end. Instead, he rode back to his ranch with Margaret. They'd been gone for nearly 2 months. Time to return home. Time to see what was left. What was left was more than Thomas had dared hope. Sarah, Emma, and Rosa had kept the ranch running smoothly. More than that, they'd expanded Margaret's language school. 23 people were now attending regular classes. The cafe Sarah ran had become a gathering place for people interested in peace. And Rosa had organized a group of women from multiple communities, white, Mexican, Apache, who met monthly to discuss shared concerns. You were only supposed to keep things alive, Thomas said, looking at the records Emma showed him. We did better than alive, Emma said with a tired smile. We made things grow. Turns out the 3 of us are pretty effective when we work together. I could have told you that, Margaret said. That night, the 5 of them sat together in the ranch house kitchen, like they'd done so many times before, but something was different now. They weren't just people who worked together. They were family. Real family. Chosen and forged through crisis. The trial changed things, Sarah said. People saw that justice was possible. That white law could actually protect Apache lives. Some people are furious about it. But some, she paused. Some are starting to think differently, starting to ask whether we really want endless war, whether there might be another way. It's slow, Rosa added. So slow, but it's movement. Real movement. What happened to the girl? Margaret asked. The one I found hiding? She's with an Apache family now. Cousins of her parents. They came to thank you for finding her, for bringing justice for her family. They left gifts. Rosa gestured to a corner where a beautiful woven blanket and a pair of beaded moccasins sat. They said to tell you that you're family now, that you proved it with actions, not just words. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I didn't do it for thanks. No, but you have it anyway. The next morning, a writer came from Dakia. The message was simple. The warriors saw justice done. The families of the dead have accepted the outcome. The debt is paid. You kept your word. We will keep ours. The peace holds. Thomas read it 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. It's not over, Margaret said, reading over his shoulder. One trial doesn't end generations of conflict. No, but it's a start. A real start. Over the next year, the change continued its slow, grinding progress. More ranchers adopted peaceful policies. More people attended Margaret's language classes. The school in Broken Creek started teaching a unit on Apache culture, brief, inadequate, but better than nothing. Trade relationships developed between some Apache bands and white settlements. Small things, fragile things, but real. Thomas continued speaking whenever he was invited. Church groups, town councils, schools. He told his story over and over until he was sick of hearing his own voice. But it mattered. Every time he spoke, a few more people reconsidered their assumptions. A few more people realized the Apache were human. The threats never completely stopped. Someone burned his barn 2 years after Pritchard's hanging. Someone poisoned 3 of his horses. Someone sent a letter saying his family would be killed, ironic, since he had no blood family. But the 4 women who were his chosen family were threat enough. They hired guards, installed better locks, learned to sleep lightly, but they kept working. 5 years after Thomas's return from his year with the Apache, Miss Hartley organized a peace gathering. White settlers, Mexican families, and Apache representatives all invited to meet on neutral ground, to eat together, to talk, to try to find common ground. Thomas wasn't sure it would work. He showed up anyway. 200 people came, more than expected. They sat in rough circles, grouped by community at first, then gradually mixing. The food was shared white biscuits and Apache corn cakes and Mexican tamales all on the same tables. Dakia was there. Older now, with gray threading his black hair. He found Thomas in the crowd. You did it, Dakia said. Or at least you started it. This gathering 5 years ago, it would have been impossible. Now it's happening. Not perfect, not easy, but happening. I couldn't have done it alone, Thomas said. He gestured to where Margaret was translating for a group of mixed participants, where Sarah was organizing the food service, where Emma was taking notes for the town newsletter, where Rosa was introducing an Apache grandmother to a white minister. They did it. We all did it together. Yes, family. Dakia smiled slightly. That's what you showed us all those years ago. That family isn't just blood. It's choice, it's sacrifice. It's standing together when everything tries to push you apart. This, he gestured at the gathering. This is family too, a bigger family. Harder to build. Easier to break. But still family. They stood together watching the gathering. It wasn't peaceful exactly. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments of tension. But no one had drawn a weapon. No one had walked away. People were trying. Actually trying to see each other as human. That night, as the gathering dispersed, Thomas found himself sitting alone watching the sunset. He thought about the choice Dakia had given him so many years ago. Point to one woman and let 3 die. It had seemed impossible then. A cruelty designed to break him. But it hadn't been cruelty. Not really. It had been teaching. Dakia had been showing him that every choice mattered. That pretending choices didn't exist, like sending his men away instead of facing justice, was itself a choice. That trying to avoid the hard decisions just meant someone else paid the price. Thomas had learned to choose. Not the easy choice or the safe choice, but the right choice. The choice that honored the web of connection between people. The choice that said all lives mattered, not just the ones that looked like you. The four women joined him as the last light faded. Thinking deep thoughts? Sarah asked, settling beside him with a grunt. Thinking about choices. That day in the village, Emma said quietly. She rarely spoke of it, but sometimes the memory surfaced. When you refused to point, when you created a different option. I thought you were going to get us all killed. I almost did, but you didn't. You showed us something I hadn't understood before. That the terms of a choice aren't fixed. That sometimes the bravest thing is to reject the options you're given and make new ones. I learned that from all of you, Thomas said. When you stepped forward. When you all claimed the debt, you didn't accept that only one could be saved. You tried to change the terms. I just followed your lead. Rosa made the sign of the cross. God works in mysterious ways. I've said that prayer so many times it lost meaning. But watching how that terrible day became this, she gestured at the gathering grounds, now empty but still holding the echo of 200 people choosing peace. That's God's work. Using our fear and pain and choices to build something we couldn't have imagined. Or it's just people finally getting tired of killing, Sarah said pragmatically. Either way, I'll take it. Margaret laughed softly. Both can be true. People are complicated. Maybe that's what we all learned. That there's no one answer, no perfect choice. Just the best choice we can make with what we know and who we are. They sat together as night fell completely. The stars emerged, sharp and bright in the clear desert air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. The land continuing its ancient conversations, indifferent to the human dramas played out across its surface. Thomas realized he was happy. Not the simple happiness of a problem solved or a goal achieved. Something deeper. The happiness of knowing he was living according to his values. That he'd kept his promises. That the year of learning hadn't been wasted. That the debt paid years ago continued to mean something. I'm grateful, he said quietly, for all of you. For that terrible day that brought us together. For everything that came after. I wouldn't have survived any of it alone. You wouldn't have had to, Sarah said firmly. That's the point. That's what you taught us. We're not alone. We're never alone. Not unless we choose to be. The years continued their march. Thomas grew older, his hair gray, his body slower. The ranch prospered modestly, never rich, but stable. The peace between whites and Apache remained fragile, tested regularly by incidents and misunderstandings. But it held more often than it broke. Margaret's language school became a permanent institution. Emma started teaching business skills to Apache women interested in trading with white settlements. Sarah's cafe in town became legendary for being the one place where everyone was welcome and everyone had to behave. Rosa's interfaith women's circle grew to include 4 communities and met monthly without fail. The 4 women never married. Not because no one asked, they all received proposals, but because the family they'd built together mattered, more than the traditional structures they'd been taught to want. They lived together at the ranch, working together, growing old together, finding in their chosen family something deeper than romance. Thomas watched them with quiet pride. They'd each come to him as employees, people who needed work and money. They'd become something far more important. They'd become the proof that family could be built from choice and crisis. That blood wasn't the only bond that mattered. Dakia visited twice more over the years. The last time was when Thomas was in his 60s, feeling his age in every joint and muscle. They sat together on the ranch house porch, 2 old men watching the sun set like they'd done so many times before. Do you think it worked? Thomas asked. All of it. The year I spent with your people, the trial, the peace gatherings. Did it actually change anything? Dakia considered. Yes and no. The killing is less, The understanding is more. Young people on both sides grow up with different stories than their parents had. This matters, but, he paused. But the fundamental problems remain. Whites want land. Apache want to live as they always have. Those two desires don't align easily. So the conflict continues, just in different forms. That's depressing. No, it's realistic. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the choice to resolve conflict without killing. We haven't ended conflict. We've just changed how we handle it. That's victory enough. I suppose you're right. I usually am. Dakaya smiled. You've lived well, Thomas Bellamy. You paid your debt. You kept your promises. You built something that will outlast you. Not many people can say that. Will it outlast me? Or will it all fall apart when I'm gone? That depends on whether you taught others to carry it forward. Did you? Thomas thought about the language school, the peace circles, the young people who'd grown up with different stories, the ranchers who'd adopted new practices, the families white and Apache who traded and talked and sometimes even visited each other. Maybe, he said. I hope so. Hope is enough. Hope and action. You had both. That's rare. Dakia left the next morning. Thomas never saw him again. Thomas died in his sleep 3 years later, at 67. It was a quiet death, painless as such things go. He went to bed one night and didn't wake up. Sarah found him in the morning, peaceful, his face relaxed in a way it rarely was when he was alive. The funeral was held at the ranch. Hundreds came. Whites, Mexicans, Apache, all mixed together. Miss Hartley spoke about his work with the schools. Marshall Davies, now retired, spoke about the Pritchard trial and how it had changed territorial law. An Apache elder spoke about the debt paid and the honor kept. The 4 women stood together through it all. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence was testimony enough. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree. The grave marker was simple: Thomas Bellamy, 1798 to 1865, rancher, teacher, bridge builder. Beneath that, Margaret had insisted they add one more line in both English and Apache. He chose family. After the funeral, the 4 women returned to the ranch house. It felt empty without Thomas, but also somehow fuller. His presence lingered in the books he'd read, the chair he'd favored, the careful way he'd organized his desk. What do we do now? Emma asked. We keep going, Sarah said firmly. We keep the ranch running. Keep the school operating. Keep building the peace. That's what he'd want. That's what we want too, Rosa added. This isn't just his work anymore. It's ours. It always was. Margaret nodded. We're family. Family doesn't end when one member dies. It continues. It adapts. It keeps choosing to be family every single day. They kept their word. The ranch continued operating for another 40 years. The language school grew into a cultural center. The peace gatherings became annual traditions. The patterns Thomas had started continued to ripple outward, changing the territory in small but meaningful ways. Sarah died first, at 73, still running the cafe in town. Emma followed 5 years later, her account books kept perfect to the last day. Rosa lived to 89, leading the women's circle until the month before she died. Margaret outlived them all, reaching 92, still teaching Apache language to anyone who'd listen. They were all buried on the hill next to Thomas, their markers simple and identical. She chose family. The ranch passed to one of the students from Margaret's school, a young woman of mixed Apache and Mexican heritage who'd grown up hearing the stories. She kept it running, kept the traditions alive, kept building bridges between communities. Decades later, a historian researching territorial history came across the story of Thomas Bellamy and the 4 women. She interviewed descendants, read letters and journals, pieced together what had happened. The story she published made waves. Not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because it challenged the standard narrative of the Old West. Instead, of cowboys and Indians, good guys and bad guys, civilization versus savagery, Here was a story about choice and consequence, about people trying to find a third way, about family built from crisis and choice rather than blood. Some criticized the historian for romanticizing, for making Thomas seem more heroic than he was, for ignoring the ways he'd failed and compromised. These were fair criticisms. Thomas had been flawed. He'd made mistakes. He'd never fully understood Apache culture, despite his year of learning. He'd remained, in many ways, a white man trying to bridge a gap he couldn't fully cross. But he'd tried. And that had mattered. The historian ended her book with a question. What if, instead of asking who won the West, we asked who tried to share it? What different stories might we tell? It was the kind of question Thomas would have appreciated. The land where the ranch had stood eventually became part of a national heritage site. The graves on the hill were preserved. Visitors could walk the grounds, read the plaques explaining what had happened there. Imagine the 5 people who'd built something fragile and important on that dusty patch of desert. Some visitors understood immediately what the site represented. Others dismissed it as naive idealism. A few were moved to tears. Most just took photos and left. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes someone would stand at those graves and think about choice, about debt and payment, about family built from crisis, about the courage it took to stand between 2 groups and try to build a bridge when everyone was calling for war. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes that person would leave changed, would go home and make different choices, would try to build bridges in their own way, in their own time. The ripples continued outward. Stories do that. They move through time, through generations, changing shape but keeping their essential meaning. The story of Thomas Bellamy and his choice, his refusal of the choice given, his creation of a new choice, his year of learning, his lifetime of bridge building, became one of those stories. It was told around campfires and in classrooms. It was simplified and embellished and distorted and corrected. It became legend, then history, then a story people told to explain how peace was possible even when it seemed impossible. The 4 women's part in the story was sometimes forgotten, sometimes emphasized, depending on who was telling it and why. But the core remained. They'd all chosen family. They'd all stepped forward when stepping back would have been safer. They'd all paid the debt together. And that choice, that simple, terrifying choice to claim connection instead of isolation, to pay together instead of alone, had changed everything. The sun set over the heritage site where the ranch had stood. Tourists departed. The gates closed. The land returned to the quiet that had been there before humans and would be there after. But on the hill, under the cottonwood tree that had grown ancient and gnarled, 5 simple markers stood in a row. The last light touched them, then faded. The markers read, Thomas Bellamy. He chose family, Sarah Greenwood. She chose family, Emma Reardon. She chose family, Rosa Delgado. She chose family, Margaret Chun. She chose family, 5 people who'd faced an impossible choice and found a way to make it possible. 5 people who'd learned that the hardest choices were often the most important. 5 people who'd discovered that family wasn't about blood, but about standing together when everything tried to push you apart. The debt had been paid. The bridges had been built. The story continued. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the land remembered. The springs and canyons and ancient rocks that had witnessed everything. The cottonwood tree that had shaded 5 graves for generations. The wind that carried whispers of old choices and new ones yet to be made. The land remembered that once, in a time of endless killing, a few people had chosen differently, had chosen family, had chosen peace, however fragile, had chosen to stand in the impossible middle and build something that shouldn't have worked but did. The land remembered, and the memory lived on in the stories people told, in the choices they made, in the families they built from crisis and choice, and stubborn refusal to accept that war was the only option. It was enough, not perfect, not complete, but enough. The story of the rancher's choice and the 4 women who'd shared it lived on.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.